So for more, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio international affairs analyst Dan Perry, author of the newsletter Ask Questions Later and the former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, and security analyst Jonathan Regev. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. So Houthis have been targeting Israel for the better part of this war, and impact or not, effective or not, it still is ongoing. Who effectively and realistically could stop them at this juncture?
The reasonable aspiration Israel might have is to weaken the Houthis enough to encourage the Saudis and the UAE to move back in conjunction with remaining troops loyal to the internationally recognized pre-Houthi government that ruled Sana'a, and it still rules other parts of Yemen, and indeed rules the Aden port, just not the Hodeidah port that the Houthis rule. The Houthis have taken over half the country. That part that is most able to impede maritime traffic headed up to Egypt through the Suez Canal, and is closer to Israel. So the remarkable thing is how undeterrable they are. Remember that just less than 2 weeks ago, Israel conducted a strike on the Houthi cabinet. They are sort of the government of part of Yemen, so let's call it the cabinet. There was one official who was termed the prime minister, and he and a bunch of ministers were killed. And this mattered not a fig, and they continue to fight on, daring Israel to do what I think Israel would be wise not to do in this case, which is to begin a kind of escalation that seems justified when you're being attacked by terrorists relentlessly, and risk causing damage to civilian populations and civilian infrastructure in Yemen, and risk a return of the reconstitution of the narrative that we see in Gaza, where Israel was attacked, and now Israel is seen all over the world as the aggressor because of the scale of the damage to civilians in Gaza. So absent that, given that the Houthis are very much embedded in civilian population, there's not that much you can do, except perhaps, for example, to blockade the port of Hodeidah. That they probably could do. That would involve preventing foodstuffs and medicines from going into a country that has had a cholera epidemic and where 500,000 people have died in the past decade because of the war and instability and misery caused by the Houthis. So it really is a pickle. And basically, Israel needs to continue doing what it's been doing, which is to strike when it has opportunities to actually degrade the Houthis.
Now the various countries of the world condemn Israel. They should be ashamed of themselves. What did they do after America took out Osama bin Laden? Did they say, oh, what a terrible thing was done to Afghanistan or to Pakistan? No, they applauded. They should applaud Israel for standing and up to these same principles and carrying them out. And I say to Qatar and all nations who harbor terrorists, you either expel them or you bring them to justice. Because if you don't, we will.
I want to start with Qatar itself. Financiers, host to terror, mediators potentially straddling these dubious roles all at once, an ally to the United States, and all of this unfolding right now as we wait to see confirmation about exactly how effective those strikes in Doha actually were. Your concerns, your thoughts?
I don't believe anything being said right now because we have to be honest, there's a big mystery here. It is very hard to contemplate that Israel would have attacked in Qatar, which is a U.S. ally, which hosts the largest U.S. airbase for 1 million miles around, whose skies are basically controlled by the U.S. without coordinating with the U.S. Yet we are expected to believe more or less that's what happened. On the other hand, if they did coordinate with the U.S., maybe not in time, maybe not through the best channels, but if they did coordinate with the U.S., as it seems they would have to do, that almost guarantees the U.S. would tip off the Qataris, who would tip off the Hamasniks, which also might be what happened, dooming the operation to fail. None of it makes any sense. But if indeed Israel attacked in Qatar without letting the U.S. know, that is very, very brazen. Puts the U.S. in an impossible position of having prevented two allies from fighting, and very much endangers Israel's drive for an expansion of the Abraham Accords and so forth. Not because the UAE and Saudi Arabia really care about Qatar, but because public opinion in the Arab world is not irrelevant, and this appears to have humiliated Qatar unless they were somehow involved. Another low possibility contingency that we can't completely rule out. But I'll say this: Netanyahu is being extremely disingenuous when he claims that he would go after terrorists wherever they may be. When the European Union and others express outrage here, it's not because they don't want Hamas leaders to be killed. I mean, maybe in some cases, but that's not really the issue. The issue is that this is a violation of the sovereignty of a country that whatever one can say of that country, sponsors terror, whatever, they also do other things. Like they have a Georgetown University campus in Qatar and over $1 trillion worth of investments in the U.S. It's a sovereign country that Israel attacked. Would Netanyahu really attack terrorists wherever they are if they were in Turkey? Not so sure. What if they were in France? I'm pretty sure he wouldn't. So the issue here is a violation of the sovereignty of Qatar. Very disingenuous to ignore that. Almost impossible to explain how it could be that this even came about in a manner that where a day later we don't know if the U.S. knew about it or if Israel risked that its planes should be shot out of the sky by Americans. It's manic. But what is for sure is that I don't want to condemn it because I'm aware of the fact that had it succeeded in wiping out the entire Hamas leadership, probably I would say it was a gamble worth taking. And that's just the truth. And you know what? I know Trump would. He would be claiming credit for it. So I don't necessarily believe Trump. Whatever he says, I'm fairly certain that if this had been as successful as the Israeli strike on Iran, despite the different circumstances that wiped out much of the military leadership and the nuclear scientist leadership of Iran, Trump waited a little bit, saw it was successful, and pretty much instantly took credit. And it wouldn't have blown me away if that's what would have happened here, and indeed what might still happen here if it turns out mysteriously that it was more successful than it appears at this moment.
So talk to us about the security concerns about what is unfolding right now. Who said yes? Who gave the green light to that strike to actually happen? Who turned a blind eye? What are your thoughts?
It's a very big question, as Dan said. Everything being said, we really do not know what to believe and what not to believe. The conspiracies circling here around the country are huge in the past 24 hours since this attack. What do we really know? We don't know.
But Jonathan, we can do an assessment of what is more likely. What is more likely? That Israel risked infuriating its primary benefactor, without whom there is no capacity to continue the war in Gaza, the U.S., or that everyone's lying to journalists?
Most probably Israel did tell the U.S. I don't think Israel would risk acting in an American ally without alerting the United States.
Netanyahu is not that stupid. He's not insane. That would be an act of craziness. But might Trump be lying right now? Is there precedent to that? Quite possibly so.
It's also quite possible all along they were on the very same page, and we'll find out more details in weeks and months, maybe years to come. Sweeping new measures by Israel's biggest trading partner. The European Union is suspending its bilateral support with Israel. Ursula von der Leyen announcing a partial freeze on EU trade, also saying sanctions would be imposed on what she called extremist Israeli ministers without naming anyone. The European Commission president made the announcement during her State of the Union speech, slamming what she called man-made famine in Gaza and a clear attempt by Israel to undermine the two-state solution. How viable is it? And Dan, the significance of the messaging around what we just heard there from the EU Commission president right now. In the war, there's enough pressure on Israel from many parts of the globe as we speak. Your thoughts on this setback?
I think what this represents, the messaging that it represents, is that the European political class wants to create whatever pressure it can on Israel to end the war. And I have no doubt it will be spun in Israel as some version of weakness before Hamas or even enmity towards Israel. And, I heard a discussion today in Israeli media about how Ursula von der Leyen is a friend of Israel, but now she's turning against Israel. And others were skeptical that she ever was a friend of Israel. She's a big friend of Israel. Now, I go to various conferences in Europe about NATO and other such issues, and the people that attend these conferences are like tough-minded and many military people, and they're all friends of Israel. All of them want Hamas destroyed. All of them want the hostages returned. Most of them want a two-state solution to save Israel demographically from being a binational state. They're total friends of Israel. Almost none of them want the war to continue. Pretty much in alliance with 75% of the Israeli public. that, with regret, wants to end the war because they notice that for 2 years it's not achieving the final destruction of Hamas, potentially cannot without also killing the hostages. So that's where we are. This is unlikely to happen very quickly because, yeah, Germany and Italy will veto it. Now that's clear. But if it should, if the war should continue another year or two, Europe's goods and services trade with Israel annually is about 70 billion euros, depending on exchange rates. That's about almost a third of Israel's international trade. The access that under the Horizons program Israel has to European R&D, not to mention civilian funding of its own tech program, is extremely important to Israel's ability to maintain a status as a central hub of global technological innovation. It would be extremely unwise to just dismiss it. And I repeat, this stuff is coming from friends of Israel, not enemies of Israel.
You might call them friends of Israel, but many would say that there wasn't much condemnation from many of those countries after the 7th of October. And when we look at the calls for recognition, a lot of people feel that Europe has left Israel in
Benita,
the lurch right now.
I think the recognition is a mistake because it strengthens Hamas, and the elimination of Hamas is a precondition for a Palestinian state, which I do want, demilitarized. But they're doing it in good faith, not bad faith. They believe that they have to do something to end the war and to restart the two-state solution. I think it's a mistake, but I do not go around thinking that Keir Starmer and even Emmanuel Macron are enemies of Israel. That's just nonsense.
Well, we've got an update on Emmanuel Macron coming up later on in the show, so stay with us. We will pick up on this conversation right now, though. Elizabeth Surkov is a free woman heading back home to Israel at last after surviving captivity in Iraq. The Israeli-Russian researcher from Princeton University had been held hostage for the past 2.5 years after being abducted by a pro-Iranian militia in Baghdad. The breakthrough is largely attributed to recent efforts by the Trump administration and pressure it had imposed on Iraq. Many questions, Dan Perry, around the timing of this release. A surprise indeed. Happy indeed. Your insights.
I don't know what cost is going to be paid for this. I think the main lesson is that it's a very big risk for an Israeli citizen who wasn't born in Israel to use a foreign passport and to go to these countries and assume that all will be well. I understand her research took her to Iraq and other places that are not friendly to Israel, and that she'd been there in the past. I don't exactly know, but that's what's been reported and what I can see. And that's a massive risk. She was born in St. Petersburg. I guess it was Leningrad back then. I guess she figured no one will know, but an academic researcher may not be fully anonymous. And the fact is that what happened. Kataib Hezbollah is a force for evil in the world. They're a leading light of the popular mobilization forces, which are partly Iraqi-funded but entirely Iranian-backed disruption battalions that have created great damage for the stability of Iraq, and occasionally this group occasionally fires at and kills U.S. troops still stationed in the area. And one of the major goals, I think, of coming years is to bring about their demilitarization and their disarming. And it's a reminder that we have not just Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas to contend with, but also these miscreants in Iraq, who, at the behest of Iran, were also no strangers to firing projectiles at Israel.
The Gaza conquest plan is built in a way in which the army defines as a modular. What does that mean? It means that it can be stopped at any time if an agreement is reached. Very big question as to who you can reach with an agreement if the top negotiators and the top officials of the other side may have been killed or are hiding because they're afraid they might be killed. So who do you negotiate with? But that's another question. As far as Israel is concerned, this is happening. The attack is happening practically every day. The IDF spokesperson in the Arabic language releasing statements saying, calling the residents to head south, promising them that in the area of what is known as the Mawasi next to Khan Yunis, there's food, there's shelter, there's even field hospitals. There, at least as far as what Israel is transmitting outside, it seems as if this attack is imminent.
Dan Perry, there's the military pressure Jonathan Regev is outlining right now. We just heard a short while ago in the show, the French president is working to help get some kind of a deal. The US president is also meeting with hostage families, working to try and get some kind of a deal. How do you see it unfolding? What is it going to take to get the hostages back home?
The hostages could be back home tomorrow if Israel agreed to end the war. And that has more or less been the case for almost 2 years. The trouble is this leaves Hamas in power in Gaza. Israel is seeking a surrender by Hamas, which I think the entire world would love to see. I would love to see it. The European Union has called for this. The US is calling for this. The Arab League called just over a month ago on Hamas to disarm. Israel's only asking for what everyone wants. But as of this moment, Hamas is willing to return the hostages in exchange for an end to the war and not to have this takeover of Gaza City, and is also willing, I believe on record, to hand over the keys of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority, but is not willing to disarm. They want to remain a militia undermining the authority of the Palestinian Authority or whatever else civilian force takes over Gaza.
Sounds like Hezbollah to me.
Exactly, Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, Israel is rightly not prepared for this.
Because then what happened on the 7th of October will simply happen again.
It might not, but it's not a good scenario for anyone, including for the Palestinians. So the only question on the table today really is how to get Hamas to also agree to disarm. Not so simple. I don't think invading Gaza City is necessarily the way to do it. Who knows? Maybe a year from now, what remains of Hamas will somehow surrender, but more likely as a prolonged multi-year insurgency of the kind that the Americans faced in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and which would be unbelievably costly, would involve Israel not only continued international delegitimization, but huge costs to have a military administration that will house and feed and provide welfare to millions of Palestinians. It is probably not as good an outcome or a strategy as what I've been recommending, which is indeed end the war, save the hostages, and then condition the reconstruction of Gaza on Hamas disarming. Just condition all of it. And indeed, allow Palestinians who want to leave this tent city, which is what remains of Gaza, to leave if Hamas doesn't disarm. And let's see if under such pressure, with the entire planet, including most Palestinians demanding it, Hamas continues to resist. On the military side, with an invasion of Gaza, they probably actually will for another prolonged period.
That's a wrap for now for this edition of The Rundown.